War Sails has been out for quite some time now, and I thought it'd probably be a good chance to look into where it's gone, where it's been, and exactly why this DLC leaves me some concerns with where Bannerlord is at this point and the future of the game and the DLC in general. Because, you see, War Sails had so much hype, it had so much potential behind it, adding in naval combat, a fully new faction, overworld travel changes to the game, new resources and entirely new mechanics, not to mention the first time we've seen proper cutscenes within Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord and an actual story. Yet that's not how it ended up being. You see, whilst mixed reviews on Steam, the popularity of the DLC has wavered, with bugs, issues, patches that haven't really, striked confidence into the heart of its player base. But the launch state showed a pattern of systematic problems, not just being a bit of a rough DLC launch. And this actually caused me to want to talk about why I'm worried about the future of War Sails, but also Bannerlord in general. The patches, they don't represent polishing, they represent firefighting. And the fact is this: there are basic things like campaign maps soft locking, some of the actual story quests don't let you finish them, key items missing entirely until post-launch, and a lot of the units not being finished yet were fixed only after the fact. But this to me states a lot about where Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord is and where it's going in the near future. Let's talk about the actual release. It came out on the 26th of November, and of course there was a lot of hype behind it. This was not only the first expansion that we'd had for Mount and Blade 2 Bannerlord, but the first real big thing in, 5 years. Actually, way over 5.5 years. This has been the most insane timeline for game development ever. Of course, Bannerlord came out in 2020 in early access, then we get the full release a few years ago. But yes, it's been 5.5 years since we actually got some sort of DLC or expansion to the game. But of course, it was adding in naval combat, something that was really touched upon in Warband with, Viking Conquest, but never really done to the sheer amount of polish that I think a lot of people wanted. Yet after the War Sails release, it had its issues. Because of this, Taleworlds released multiple hotfixes within the first 72 hours. I'm talking about 4 or 5 different patches that came in. We're not talking about day 1 patch, we're talking about day 8 patch at this point. It's going absolutely insane. And then, of course, 2 large updates within the first week. The community, of course, we're talking about how this was great. Praising the speed, the nature of fixing implies that the DLC was, looked after in some ways, but to me, it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think it's great that Taleworlds have responded so fast to the issues, but some of these issues are so core to the DLC that they can't have been a matter of, sorry, that just slipped through. This is more of a systematic issue. For an example, not just the crashes when entering or leaving naval battles, but crashing when leaving the smithing menu. And that seemed to be a pretty consistent thing. Crew capacity incorrectly calculated. AI wouldn't board when they needed to. Nords would not spawn with intended equipment. That for me states that this is not just some teething issues, these are fundamental things that were missing from the DLC. They're not balance tweaks, they're stability errors that indicate the DLC shift in a barely unstable state. And that's not all. Taleworlds publicly delayed the DLC from June of 2025 to November. That's 6 months, and it still felt a little bit rushed. You see, players assumed that the delay was to polish systems, yet the final product still released with missing armor sets, unfinished troop equipment, AI bugs, virtual assets that were just not included, quest lines that couldn't be progressed. The logical conclusion is that the delay doesn't mean that they needed more time. It means that the decision to delay came too late, and maybe they should have even done it again. Yet I'm very, very well aware of the position that Taleworlds are in. Not just for themselves, but for the fan base. And maybe some of that is their own doing, but I think it's very important to state anyway. Taleworlds have that reputation of delaying games and taking a long, long time. And I don't actually think it's necessarily an issue with the fact that they are just slow developers. I don't think they're any different to any other developers. I think they are sometimes too transparent. Sometimes they work with their audience too much, indicating developer blogs and leading up hype to releases. I mean, we knew that Bannerlord was coming out 10 years before it ever was released. That is insane. But it also has a positive side to it. You see, Taleworlds position themselves as this AA but consumer-friendly publisher. They make games that the community like. They've built up this incredibly strong and niche community, but this means that they want to work with them. They want to say, look, this is our next project, come along with us as we develop it. But they have to accept that the latter side of that is the fact that people feel like they're waiting years. While most developers won't even announce a game, maybe even a couple years away from its release, Taleworlds sometimes will do it half a decade, pushing to a full decade before a game's release, which is just the way that they've come about developing, and they've managed to build an incredibly strong community for it. So maybe for them it is worth it, but in this case, this is where they'll see some of the downfall. This wasn't a delay to improve quality. It was a delay that seemed to reach the bare minimum shippable state, and it still failed to hit that quite a bit. But let's talk about these basic features that I've keep hinting at, because I want to actually go in a little bit more in depth. This is why I wanted to make this video, because of one patch note I saw. Huskarls not using the intended armor. This might seem like a small little thing to you, but I mean, it's the fact that the Huskarls are probably the most iconic unit of the Nords. Okay, let's put that aside. That doesn't matter either. But not using their intended armor. It was that word, intended, that really pricked my ears up. They meant to have different armor, but the DLC didn't ship with that armor. It shipped with the wrong values, the wrong models. Correct armor was only added after community backlash. It was only added in the subsequent patches after release, which made me think, okay, what else in here should have been in the actual base game, but has sort of been slid under the radar? Because they were going to have to do patches to fix things anyway, yet they've added in some core features that should have been at release. Either they forgot about or they just weren't ready just yet, but they managed to Trojan horse their way into the game. Naval map movements, getting stuck. One of the headline features of the DLC, players couldn't transition between land and sea correctly quite a lot. And the campaign, well, a lot of it being completely broken. AI bugged and AI pathfinding when you're boarding. I understand how these things can be teething issues. It worked mostly upon release, but of course, trying to tweak that and make it work every time is always going to be something that takes a bit of time. But the other thing, missing weapons and items. Several Nord weapons weren't present on the troop lists. They showed up in patch notes only after players noticed. These are not balancing issues, and I think that's the problem for me. They have been actually snuck in patch notes that have subsequently come out after the release of War Sails, but actually these are not finished issues. These are core features that should have been in the release, and I'm wondering why they weren't. Because this DLC shouldn't have come out at the time it did, or at least I think that's just the way it is. But that takes us on to the pattern that Taleworlds have. The part that sort of makes us look further into the core of the company. War Sails reveals the same cracks in Taleworlds that, well, Bannerlords Early Access did before. Quality assurance problems. There's too many basic functionality issues that have been slipping through here, suggesting that there doesn't seem to be a pipeline that keeps up with these heavy updates, keeping the quality as high as possible. And of course, the over-ambitious scope going with that almost doubles down on these problems. War Sails adds map travel, physics, naval combat and factions, AI layers, new scripts. This is not just some DLC content, really. This is a major expansion and delivered by a studio that didn't seem quite ready, meaning that it was put out before it was ever done. Things like missing weapons, missing animations, missing armor, not being able to finish the basic campaign that was added in means that the deadlines that Taleworlds set for themselves just seem unrealistic. Even delaying from June to November, still releasing half release, this screams internal pressure, I think, to hit a certain time. But it also goes on to what they mentioned about the development for War Sails. There is a main team that is still working on the base game of Bannerlord, whilst the other have been working on DLCs and expansions, meaning that now Taleworlds are split in two. That means less people overall are going to be working on this expansion than really what should be for a polished game release, because, I mean, War Sails should have been treated like an entire game release in terms of its polish, yet it probably, and doesn't seem like it had the manpower in order to do such a thing. But I've spoken about why this DLC is a little bit of a red flag for the future of Taleworlds, and why that one patch note really stood out to me as not necessarily fixing teething issues, but fundamental problem in the timeline of the development for War Sails. But it's not all doom and gloom. In fact, I think War Sails has been a mixed bag for a reason. Of course, it has many issues, but there is so many good ideas and such a strong platform that Taleworlds can build upon. And I think going into this, experiencing the fact that Taleworlds do this quite a lot, they release early access and then they sort of develop and work until it is a full feature-rich title, is the way they're going to do War Sails as well. Well, Taleworlds did patch the game fast. They have fixed almost every major War Sail issues within under 2 weeks. They clearly care about this game and the community that, well, they're making the game for. And not just this, they have some serious talent here. The systems are creative, and whilst ambitious, they managed to pull up something that I remember jumping into War Sails and seeing these ships crashing into each other and actually flowing pretty well over the open seas and thinking, how is this in Mount & Blade? But they did it. They did do it. Hopefully they can just take War Sails as a bit of a wake-up call, having a look at the internal pipeline of when things are released and actually understanding that me personally, and I think maybe a lot of people watching this video, are okay with not knowing about an expansion or DLC until late on in its development. Maybe if you've got the next thing coming out in a few years, don't tell us until 6 months before. See how that works this time. And of course, if there are delays, we prefer delays rather than a patchy release. That's all I'm going to say. However, what do you think War Sails says about Bannerlord's future? Do you think they rushed the DLC, or is this just how complex Bannerlord's development has become now? I'd love to see your responses down below. But please subscribe to the channel for more content on Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. Yet until then, I will see you in the next one.